is the first episode in our series, Master H Meets. People still arriving in the waiting room, just let me admit them. Lots of people arriving. My goodness, look at this. They're all coming along to watch this evening. Good evening. It's so lovely to see so many of you here. To answer Master Sheeman's question that he posed in the chat box, what is that awful noise? That is, in fact, Master Sheeman, the title tune from the film The Greatest Showman. And indeed, over the course of the next half hour, I hope that both the sub-treasurer, Greg Dorey, and myself will be entertaining you. Probably the best way to watch this evening's entertainment is to have your Zoom set on speaker view so that you can see both Greg and myself. My name is Alastair Hodge, aka Master H, and you are very welcome here this evening. My guest on this first occasion is, of course, the sub-treasurer of the Inner Temple, and I'm delighted to welcome to the program Mr. Greg Dorey. Now, Greg, help me out with this. You're the sub-treasurer of the Inner Temple, and I'm sure that many of those watching will actually want to know what the sub-treasurer is and what the sub-treasurer does. What is the sub-treasurer, and what exactly do you do, if anything?
Well, Master Hodge, Alastair, many congratulations on becoming the Inner Temple's Master of the Revels, and thank you, I think, for inviting me to be the subject of your very first revel.
Pleasure.
So, the history of the sub-treasurer goes back a very long way. I suppose the origin is to be found in Chaucer's Manciple or Maunciple in the Canterbury Tales, written at the tail end of the 14th century. And, he tells a very unpleasant tale all about what happens to gossips. But the interesting bit is in the prologue, where it becomes clear that he is looking after 30 lawyers and making sure they're accommodated. And Chaucer says something like he was wise in the buying of victuals. He's less educated than the lawyers he looks after, but he's also much more cunning. And Chaucer says he fooled them all. So he's clearly ripping them off for the price of their victuals or something like that. And clearly that sort of thing would not happen these days. And then you start to hear about the sub-treasurer or under-treasurer in the 16th century, and the title changes a little bit before it settles down to sub-treasurer. You'll be aware the other inns all ended up with under-treasurers, but we like to be different, so we have a sub-treasurer. And the sub-treasurer in those days seems to be almost a kind of personal assistant to the treasurer, but the job evolves, and then in 1682 there's a chap called Anthony Belbin who is made sub-treasurer. And this is when the job becomes permanent, and he has a job description which is all about looking after the finances and the estate, and he's paid £5 a term for the pleasure of doing that. Anyway, fast forward until today, I'm really the chief executive of the inn.
Sort of head honcho, big cheese, as one might call you.
Grand fromage, indeed. I lead, I use the word loosely, our excellent teams of staff. As you know, we have a finance team, an estates team. We have library and education and training and treasury who manage our membership services. And then we've got an IT team and archives and catering and the garden and the porters who look after our security. So there's the job of managing all those teams. I'm also secretary to Bench Table, our board of management, so a sort of company secretary, if you like, secretary to a number of committees, and I'm responsible for maintaining our international relations and relations with bodies like the Council of the Inns of Court and Temple Church and so on. So I suppose in a nutshell, I'm reporting to the treasurer and more widely to Bench Table on the day-to-day management of the inn, on financial administration, on forward planning. I'm a jack of all trades.
Wowzers. I mean, do you actually get a day off? I mean, do the sort of executive committee allow you any time off based on all of that?
Christmas Day is definite every year.
Fine. Now, I know because we met firstly at a dinner before you were appointed. I think it was a private guest night. And I remember you saying that you were in the diplomatic service for around about 30 years. and you've been awarded this great title, CVO, whatever that may be. I haven't looked it up in advance of this session. But tell me a bit more about your history in the diplomatic service. I have this sort of vague idea that diplomatic service is all lavish parties and trays of Ferrero Rocher paid for by other people. And also, what is a CVO?
I might have to explain Ferrero Rocher to some of your audience tonight. There was an advertisement some years ago implying that ambassadors were godlike creatures who could reduce beautiful women to quivering ecstasy underneath the chandeliers merely by offering them a tray of gold-covered chocolates. Well, it never worked for me, I can tell you that. I'm sure you know really that diplomats are posted in many cases to a lot of difficult and dangerous places around the world. I was lucky enough to be ambassador in Budapest and Addis Ababa, and I had two historic residences to live in, but I might just as easily have been living in a converted container surrounded by sandbags. In fact, I very nearly was posted to Mogadishu on one occasion. And official receptions, they're not fun events any more than official dinners and breakfasts and lunches. They're all working occasions.
But they look so lavish. The appearance of them is this great sort of lavish affair. Is behind the scenes, it's not like that at all.
Well, that's the appearance you're aiming at. But of course, these are working occasions, though it has to be admitted that a prodigious tolerance for alcohol is a useful diplomatic accomplishment. Peter Ustinov, the late great Peter Ustinov, he used to say a diplomat is a head waiter who's allowed to sit down occasionally, and he was absolutely right about this. You may live in a beautiful residence, but it's a hotel. British ministers come and stay, senior officials come and stay. You never get any privacy. You have to organise events there. It's a sort of use it or lose it type of formula, I guess. So, and it's, of course, it's interesting and fun in a broad sense, or you wouldn't do it at all. But it's not all about Ferrero Rocher. CVO, okay. So CVO is Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, though you may call me Commander, Alastair.
Fine, I will do in the future. Absolutely fine. I'll call you Commander Dorey. I like that. Yes.
Excellent. It's an award which is given by Her Majesty the Queen. It's not a state award, and I received it in connection with the state visit to Pakistan in 1997. And if I was to give you more information about it, I would have to take you down the Peony Garden and terminate you with extreme prejudice. So I think that's enough said on that.
No, we're not doing that. I mean, it reminds me of that great line from Yes Minister, I think, where they're talking about the CMG, which is Call Me God, and then the GCMG, which is God Calls Me God. Is there a sort of hierarchy in the sort of CVO? Is there something above it or below it, or is it sort of almost a unique type of award or honour?
There is a KCVO, so the knight rank, which if I had been ambassador at the time, I might have got, but I wasn't. I was a councillor at the time.
Yeah. Leaving the diplomatic service behind, I mean, obviously, when you took over as sub-treasurer in 2018, you were thrown straight into what we all know as Project Pegasus, the major refurbishment project of our Treasury building, and indeed, I think historically, the most ambitious building or development project that the Inn has ever undertaken, without obviously breaching confidentiality or anything like that. What have been the biggest challenges so far in managing the Project Pegasus project, as it were?
Well, I'm sure you're right about the ambition. One thinks back to the period after the Second World War when the building was totally blitzed and had to be rebuilt. But in a way, when you have to rebuild an entire building or almost an entire building, it's a lot easier starting from scratch than if you have to have a major redevelopment project within an existing building. It's a lot more complicated. Well, I suppose the first challenge was getting the project off the ground in the first place. I believe it was about 9 years from the original conception until we actually started building. And my first 8 months or so in the job in 2018 were all about getting enough information in front of bench table so that it could take an evidence-based decision on whether or not to proceed with Project Pegasus. So that was in a way the first challenge. There'd been, I know, legal challenges before I actually arrived in the job. And actually, literally on my second day in the job, I was told there was a member of Inner Temple outside who'd like to come in and congratulate me on taking on the new job. And he was he was allowed in, whereupon he served me with the papers relating to an application for judicial review.
Well, welcome to the job of sub-treasurer.
So that was a good start. And then when we actually reached the point of getting the main contractor to start work, there were last-minute legal challenges as well to do with disturbance and noise and so on. So those held us up for a few weeks' time. We discovered more asbestos and hazardous material within the building than we had expected. Of course, you anticipate there'll be asbestos in an old building like this, but there was a bit more than we would have ideally liked to deal with. And then, of course, we got the pandemic, and the contractor had to put in place working practices which were compatible with government guidance and the law and so on. So that held us up again. But I have to say, since that time, it's been making great progress, the building. They're working very hard and fast, and I am very optimistic now that we will get the building back at the end of July. Originally, 2 years ago, we'd been looking at the end of April, but given all the challenges that we faced, I don't think that'll be too bad. So good progress being made. I think that there's one challenge which might have happened which didn't come about, and that would have been if Bench Table tried to micromanage the project, because I think that's what went horribly wrong after the Second World War, when the benchers took a very direct interest in everything that was going on. But Bench Table, they agreed some very detailed plans. They gave us aims and objectives. They gave us a detailed budget. And then with a few minor exceptions, they have allowed us to get on with delivering. And I think that was a very wise decision, if I may say so.
I posted the other day on my Facebook page the most wonderful video that I think has been produced by catering, looking ahead to hiring out the inn once everything is finished. I mean, it looks absolutely superb. Is there anything within the plans that still concerns you? Or are we we've got the green light almost for everything, and everything is looking good as it is set out on that video?
Well, every day there are minor issues of one sort or another, so I hesitate to say there won't be any more challenges before we finish. But actually, the structure is more or less there in place. It's a question now of filling in the inside and getting rid of the crane and taking down the scaffolding and finishing off. So that's why I can say I'm optimistic that we will now meet that end of July date.
Good. I mean, obviously, you're still with us. I mean, in 2018, you joined us. Here we are in 2021. I mean, you haven't had the sack yet. I mean, that's a good thing. But equally, you haven't felt the need to leave us. So obviously, you must find the job, relatively fulfilling and stimulating. But what about the sort of more humorous aspects of the job? What's been the funniest thing, if there is anything, that's happened to you since you took up the role?
Well, I haven't been sacked yet, though. Of course, after this interview tonight, who knows?
Well, I did note a moment ago that Master Treasurer has now joined us.
Oh, okay.
So you may have to choose your words carefully for the remainder of the interview, but do carry on.
Thank you, Alastair. Well, I suppose, in a way, never a dull day in this job, and there are moments of frequent moments of hilarity, but I think discretion would prevent me sharing a lot of those moments with you. I can't, for example...
It's exceedingly diplomatic of you, I must say.
Well, I'm just sorry, I can't tell you the story behind the empty vodka bottles in the greenhouse, for instance. But, well, I suppose a couple of stories to share with you. In my first year at the staff Christmas party, a couple of colleagues thought it would be a good idea if they had an event called "Who Murdered the Sub-Treasurer?"
Well, they were against you even at that early stage.
Clearly, things have only got worse since. And so I think this was supposed to be set in the 1920s. So I was dressed up as a gangster, and I was on the phone, basically bad-mouthing all of my colleagues. And then the camera showed a shot where my glass of water was poisoned and I died horribly. And then at the party itself, staff had to work out who exactly it was who'd poisoned me. And it turned out to be a member of the catering staff, appropriately enough. But as I was sitting there watching this film of myself being rude about all the other members of staff, and I'd been given a few pointers, but I embroidered somewhat and freewheeled a bit. I thought, is this really such a good idea? I do have to work with these colleagues for the next few years. So anyway, so that's one story. I suppose the other one would come from the summer of 2019, when after weeks of hard work, I was sitting relaxing for the first time, watching the Junior Bar Association's Night at the Musicals event. And I was sitting there comfortably in my chair, and some bloke purporting to be Pharaoh came and dragged me up on stage and made me...
Yes. I wonder to whom you're referring there. Yes,
pretending to be Joseph while he cavorted, I think is the word, around me. So, sorry, these are not especially funny, but I think they were slight oddities in my first couple of years. I think on another occasion I could probably find some funnier stories from my time in the Foreign Office, but we'll save that for later. But yes, I mean, the job is very fulfilling and exciting, not least when you, Master Hodge, are around.
Oh, what can I say? I think you'll find that the finest part of that performance in 2019, I think, was where I did those pelvic thrusts very close to your head. I'm sure that sort of stimulated you in some way.
I was trying not to look, but I sensed this happening behind me.
Can we let's move away from the inner temple? I mean, let's talk about Greg, the man, the home life. I mean, I see you're in some form of study there. I mean, obviously, you must get the time to switch off from being sub-treasurer. Can you tell us a bit about, the Greg at home? Are you married? Do you have kids? Family life? Tell us about it.
There's not a huge amount of time to completely, even when we're on leave, but in a way it's a bit more of a vocation than a job, and I suppose in a sense that was true of the Foreign Office as well, so I'm kind of used to that environment. And I have also, as well as home here, I've got a very nice flat in the inn overlooking our beautiful gardens, because during term time in particular, when there's lots of events happening, I have to be up in London.
Yes.
But we're down in Chichester at the moment, and I got to know the area when I had my first proper job, which was with the Royal Naval Supply and Transport Service in Portsmouth Dockyard. So I got to know Hampshire and West Sussex very well. My wife, Alison, didn't really know the area, but when we came back from abroad for the last time from Ethiopia, we were in East Somerset, and we were trying to work out where we might settle. And actually, Chichester ticked all the boxes, not least the fact it's got a world-class theatre 10 minutes down the road from us. So, yes, Alison and I live here. We have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, between mid-20s and early 30s. And, I'd like to say on air, I'm very proud of them. I think there are some benefits from being families within the Foreign Office, you get to see some interesting places and travel around. But there are considerable downsides as well, not least because education gets disrupted, friendships get disrupted. You have some horrible illnesses from time to time, but they have emerged from that all as nice, talented, normal human beings. So I'm extremely grateful for that.
Well, I, of course, have first-hand experience of Mrs. Dorey and her culinary skills, because obviously a New Year a couple of years ago, she was very kind to do part of the catering. I mean, is she like that at home on a sort of daily basis? Does she rustle up this wonderful cuisine for you almost on a nightly basis?
I certainly don't attempt to cook in the kitchen these days. It is her domain, and she produces some wonderful meals from there, but healthy meals too.
And I can see there's a gentleman on my screen who has the name Kit Dorey. I'm wondering if there's any relation there, because he's wearing a very attractive pair of headphones. Might I surmise that might be a member of your family?
This is son number one, indeed.
Ah, well, lovely to see son number one. Very attractive red shirt as well. I like that. Well, expanding from sort of family life, I mean, I know you've got very little time because of work and family and, everything like that. But what about hobbies, leisure activities? Do you get the time for any of them? And if so, what do you like to do in your downtime?
Well, I suppose some of the things I like to do aren't necessarily compatible with the job. I used to do a fair amount of amateur drama. I haven't actually been in a play since 2017, I think. But I do feel if you're going to be in a play, then you have to make a commitment. You need to be there for rehearsals, and actually life at the Inner Temple is a bit too busy for that. I suppose pre-pandemic, I would have mentioned an interest in the theatre and the cinema and travel, because the Foreign Office hasn't put me off completely, and tennis. And during the pandemic, it's been when I've had a chance of reading, cycling, walking, and extreme gardening.
Well, it sounds as though you've been keeping busy when you're not involved with the temple. I mean, we mentioned Mrs. Dorey's prowess with catering a moment ago. This is a question that I'm going to be asking all the guests over the next few months on Master H Meets, because I always think it sort of suggests, it gives a clue as to someone's personality. You've had a lovely starter, you've had a lovely main course, but then following the main course of the dinner, what will it be, Greg? Will it be sweet or will it be savoury in the Dorey makeup of food?
I would say I'm a very savoury person. Nothing better than a tarka vindaloo. It's like chicken, only otter. I can be tempted by a really good treacle tart, and after 2 postings in Hungary, a really good Tokai dessert wine, but essentially savoury. You're going to tell me there's something deep and psychological behind this, aren't you?
No, there isn't. I'm just always curious because an old friend of mine who a lot of people on the call will remember, the late great Gordon Pollock, who was a member of Gray's. Well, in fact, he was a member of 3 Inns. He never joined Middle Temple for reasons best known to him, but he was an Adiundum member of the Inner Temple for golfing purposes. And Gordon, if you were ever out for dinner, you'd get to the main course and he would sort of say, maybe it's now time for pudding or cheese or pudding and cheese. So would you fall into that latter category of having both, cheese and pudding, or would you stick to one or the other?
I would probably stick to the cheese, but if there was a treacle tart on the table, maybe that afterwards.
One of the great things I've learned about you over the last year, because I know that you've been a keen attender at the quizzes that I've been running for the East India Club, and after every quiz, I get an abusive email or message from you that you and Mrs. Dorey have failed yet again on the music round. Give me a clue here, Greg. If I'm going to do another quiz and do a music round, what should I put in the music round that would actually appeal to the Dorey household?
Well, I've actually got very Catholic tastes in music. I like rock, I like folk, liked classical, church music, anything by the...
I'm writing these down, by the way, just so you know.
Anything by the Temple Church choristers, of course. Church team asked me to get that in. I think if I could only listen to one artiste, it would probably be the collected works of Bob Dylan. This is Desert Island Discs, isn't it?
No, this is Master H Meets, but you're doing beautifully. Continue.
I think you probably need to go back a little further than you sometimes do, back into the 60s and early 70s.
I have noted your request and have written it down, and I think the next quiz is coming up in 2 weeks' time, so I will do my best to accommodate you on the music round. And again, last question before we sort of wrap up, because my intention was always for this to be a sort of half-hour, 45-minute thing. And I'm going to ask this question to all those who I interview. What advice would you give to young drug addicts?
Oh, God. I was getting advice from a friend earlier in the day, and she said, look, if Master Hodge asks you an impossible question, then just pretend your connection has failed and that you've frozen.
Yes, regrettably, I know. Yeah, regrettably, you haven't frozen. No, the reason for this question, it stems from an interview that I did ad hoc with an inner Templar called Darren Almeida. And we played golf and he'd beaten me. And as all American golf interviewers now do, when they interview a golfer, they ask about the round, they ask about how they hit the ball, and then they throw in some random question, totally unrelated to golf at the end, that always wrong foots the golfer. And so that's why I'm throwing in, what advice would you give to young drug addicts? It seems perfectly acceptable.
I would say, I'm really glad you came to see me, Alastair. In what way can I help you?
There we are. That's an absolutely lovely way to round off. I just want to go back to one thing, if I may, Greg, that we didn't cover. And again, if you don't feel you can answer this openly and truthfully, feel free to say so. Obviously, you've now been in the Inner Temple 3 years, and you will have made various changes in terms of the way things have been done. Is there still anything within the inn that you would like to see changed, over the course of the next year or so, that hasn't yet been changed under your watch?
Well, I think Inner Temple's successful because it does change up to a point, but in a way which is evolutionary rather than revolutionary. And I think of a number of things which have happened. The speed with which, when the pandemic began, we were able to get online and do as much as we then achieved was due to the fact that we'd had some innovative changes in our IT in preceding years. You mentioned Project Pegasus. That was a courageous step forward. We're becoming more diverse and inclusive all the time. The Inner Temple leapt into the breach and did an awful lot for, and is still doing an awful lot for hardship in the profession that's resulted from the pandemic. And of course, we have some very innovative education and training programs. But the Inn does all this with a respect for protocol and tradition and history, which I think is excellent. I'm a history graduate, I would say that. So I think there's not much to change that we haven't already sort of started to embark on changing. We do need to do more, I think, for the circuits outside London. And ironically, we planned all sorts of events on circuit in 2020. And post-pandemic, we're really going to have to go back and revisit that and have some events on circuit. But at least people on circuit have been able to use Zoom to participate in our governance arrangements much more than was possible in the past. So that's again something we've got to maintain into the future too. Other than that, I recently heard a bencher making the proposition that the sub-treasurer should be given much more power. So I'm all for that as well.
Yes, well, I have no idea who that bencher is, and as far as I'm concerned, they should be stripped of bencherdom straight away, because I think you've got enough power as it is. Greg Dorey, can I, on behalf of everyone here, I know everybody is muted, but thank you very much for joining us this evening on the first Master H Meets program. I don't know whether we want to give Greg a round of applause so he can see you on screen. Thank you all very much indeed for coming to this first Master H Meets. My thanks again to my first guest, Greg Dorey. The next Master H Meets will take place on the 12th of April of 2021, and on that occasion, Master H will be meeting Master Rahana Azib. And we'll be talking a lot about education and training, advocacy training programs, etc. This has been a Revels production for the Honourable Society of the Inner Temple. Executive producer Henrietta Amodio, produced by Kate Peters and Paul Clark. My name is Alastair Hodge, also known as Master H, saying good night, and thank you for joining us. Good night.